It's time for the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is the voice of the working class, Rick Smith.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. Big news on Wednesday. The United Auto Workers Union, they endorsed President Biden. And look, there was no doubt that was going to happen. Because, given the fact that you've got Trump on one side and Biden on the other, for working people, it should be an absolute no-brainer. But Shawn Fain, the president of the UAW, gave an incredibly powerful speech. And I wanted to quick play a couple of clips because, well, I think it's really important to understand, what Fain's argument it is. Here's clip one.
Working class people are hurting. For decades, we've been ignored at best and trampled on at worst. But we are the vast majority of society. We have the numbers and we have the votes. When we stand united, we put fear in the hearts of the billionaire class. And they do what they do best. They try to weaken us by dividing us. It's an old trick the billionaire class plays, and it's effective. Time and time again, the wealthy divide the masses as the rich walk away with all the money.
Yep. And look, this is something that we've talked about quite often here on the program. This is not new. This is something that, look, they divide us, they slice us, they dice us, they pit us against each other so that, well, it's more for them, well, less for us. And this is one of those moments where you go, Shawn Fain's spot on. Look, the billionaire class, they can divide us by male, female, gay, straight, black, white. It doesn't matter. They will find, they're masterful at it. They will find a way to pit us against each other. And look, do it very, very well. But Shawn Fain went on in this speech, and this is the meat and potatoes of the difference between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. And I got to tell you, this is, for every working person, this is the case. If you work for a living, this is the case for Joe Biden right here.
Let's take a look at the candidates in their own words and their own actions. In 2008, I happened to have a first-class seat as a negotiator during the economic recession. And in 2008, as you well know, the auto industry faced a historic crisis. We were on the edge of total collapse. With entire communities were being devastated. Hundreds of thousands of auto workers' families were left out in the street. It was our members and our retirees who sacrificed everything to save the auto industry. In that moment, Donald Trump said, and I quote, "I think that the unions are really, really hurting very badly what's going on with the auto industry," end of quote. Joe Biden, having helped save the auto industry, said the nation bet on the American auto workers and won. In 2015, when he was first running for president, Trump went even further. He said the concessions we took weren't enough. He wanted to do a rotation in the auto industry of the jobs in Michigan and the Midwest, so union auto workers would be begging for their jobs back at lower pay. He wanted to put the race to the bottom on steroids to screw the American working class.
And he did just that. And look, here's the reality, and this is where, to be quite honest, he went on even further into this and talked about, what Biden had done to help, walking the picket line, all of the things that he's done. But focus on Trump. The fact that Trump, his labor record, he's got a labor record to run on. And it's not good. And, what's interesting to me, and I have these conversations with working people all the time, that they seem to, he's listening to us. He cares about our needs, our concerns. He was smart enough to have his thumb on the pulse. I give him credit for that. Understanding that manufacturing jobs had left this country in droves, that communities were broken and hurting. I give him credit for at least knowing, hey, there's a problem. But the reality is this is a guy who, he's in it for himself, not for working people, not for you, not for me, but for himself. And I think Shawn Fain did a great job on Wednesday of laying out the case for Joe Biden in November, especially to his members. Look, it's a no-brainer if you're an auto worker. And look, if you're a working person, it should be a no-brainer. Want to hear your thoughts? Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Gonna take a quick break. Right back. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1787. That was the day known as Shays' Rebellion. The United States was a new nation, and the Constitution had not yet been written. The Revolutionary Army had won the war with Britain, but the young nation was mired in debt. During the aftermath of the war, more farmers moved into western Massachusetts. Many of them incurred high levels of debt in setting up their farms. Due to economic hard times, the farmers found it difficult to repay their debts. Local sheriffs began to seize farms and even jailed some farmers. Anger amongst the farmers began to rise. They held meetings to discuss how to respond. Many saw the government's actions as an echo of the very type of tyranny they had stood up against during the Revolutionary War. They petitioned Boston for economic relief, but their requests fell on deaf ears. The farmers began to protest the courts, disrupting the proceedings. For 6 months, the farmers waged organized resistance. One of the men whose farm was threatened for repossession was Daniel Shays. Shays was a former captain in the Continental Army who had fought against the British. He organized a force of 1,000 men. The men marched on the debtors' court in Springfield and the arsenal located there. The governor of Massachusetts called out armed troops in response. These troops were funded by wealthy merchants from the eastern part of the state. And so, on this day, 4 of Shays' men were killed as the troops attempted to forcibly remove the rebels. By February, the rebellion had been crushed. The rebellion influenced the writing of the U.S. Constitution, as some drafters were convinced that a strong central government was needed to quell further uprisings by the working class. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So some interesting new numbers out on the Affordable Care Act. I mean, the dreaded Obamacare. A record 21.3 million people signed up for health insurance through the ACA marketplace. That's, I think, like more than 9 million more than when Biden took office. And Trump did try and kill it. They did try to push it in the back. So, he had some room to grow. But this is kind of a big freaking deal. And maybe even Mary Lou Retton, maybe she'll sign up for health insurance finally with the pre-existing conditions that she thinks precludes her from getting insurance not involved. But anyway, here to share some thoughts on the big results from New Hampshire. and the big victory for the president. I've asked Colin Seeburger to come talk with us. Colin is the senior advisor for communications at the Center for American Progress Action Fund. He's also the host of their podcast, The Tent. Colin, thanks for taking time for us.
Thanks so much, Rick. It's great to chat with you.
So let's start with the ACA thing, because this is kind of a, to steal a Bidenism, this is kind of a big freaking deal.
It is a really big deal. We have actually heard for the better part of, I think, 9 years or so, Donald Trump has said, we're going to get rid of the Affordable Care Act, we're going to repeal it, and we're going to replace it with something to make healthcare great, to make it beautiful. It's going to be the best. It's exceptional. Unfortunately, we're still waiting to see what his replacement plan is for wanting to repeal the Affordable Care Act. But there actually is a candidate, there is a president who actually has been improving healthcare. And we got the latest sign of that today. Like you mentioned, we have a record number of people who are getting health insurance through the Affordable Care Act. How are they doing that? They're doing that because they have more financial help than they had when Joe Biden took office. Joe Biden passed a law that actually is bringing health insurance premiums down by an average of $800 a year for the American people. And that's just one small way, but meaningful way, that he is actually lowering the cost of healthcare. He's taken on big pharma to lower the cost of prescription drugs by empowering Medicare to negotiate for lower drug prices. He's capped the cost of insulin at $35 a month. Actually, every single insulin manufacturer is now, major insulin manufacturer is now offering their products for $35 a month. That's because of the laws that Joe Biden and Democrats got passed.
Yeah, but you don't hear about that on the corporate-controlled mainstream media. In fact, you don't hear any good news coming out about the economy or how families are doing. All I get from people, Colin, every day, and I'm sure you see this as well, it's doom and gloom. Biden inflation, the cost of everything is up because, evidently Biden's got a switch in the Oval Office that goes double the prices.
Well, for those that think that they may want to give Biden credit for controlling inflation all over the globe, because it's been a phenomenon that we've seen in country after country after country after the pandemic. And of course, that's largely related to supply chains, of course, being gummed up throughout the pandemic. But, I think the real thing here on the economy is we've actually seen in recent weeks, consumer sentiment has surged. We are actually seeing that people are feeling better about the economy today than they have in years. Why is that the case? Because the president has delivered on some of these policies to lower the cost of living. I was talking about health insurance, but he's also delivered on, lowering energy prices, utilities. He's passed a number of different bills to provide, more economic relief to families. Cutting costs is his number one domestic priority. He's taking on, corporate price gouging for things like, overdraft fees that banks levy customers, when they don't have enough money when they go to the ATM, right? A number of different areas. Taking on the airlines for, all the ridiculous fees that they try to charge you, for selecting, seats as a family and wanting to sit together. So, there's a number of ways that the president has really taken this on, but it's also building on a record that's incredibly impressive. We have the lowest inflation of any major economy in the world. We have more job creation than we've seen in decades. We're actually doing, we have had, below 4% unemployment in this country for a longer stretch of time than we have had in about 50 years. And all of that is because President Biden and Vice President Harris, their focus is on growing America's middle class. It's not necessarily about, do I look out for you only if you're a CEO or if you have a MAGA hat on? They're really focused on making sure that everybody, no matter the community you come from, is able to get ahead.
No, and they're going to have to make that case and take that on the campaign trail, because it's not getting out to most of the people that I know. But I want to talk about the New Hampshire primary really quick, because there was some interesting stuff that came out of this. Trump didn't it wasn't a knockout blow. He won, yeah, but some of the exit polling numbers were quite interesting to me, and the fact that Trump supporters are still buying the big lie that Biden didn't win and the election was stolen, but those numbers are coming down, and also the fact that Nikki Haley got a 45%, 46%, whatever it was, but those weren't really Nikki Haley voters; those were Republicans voting against Trump, which I think is really important to point out.
And of course, a lot of independents and even some Democrats understanding the threat that Donald Trump poses to our country's future, trying to prevent, him from eking out a victory in New Hampshire. New Hampshire has this unique primary system where it's open. Democrats and independents can legally participate in a Republican primary, and vice versa. Republicans can participate in a Democratic primary. But you are exactly right that, I think that Republicans are waking up to the fact that while Donald Trump may be their nominee, they're staring down the fact that MAGA extremism is the party's political death knell. It was in 2018, it was in 2020, it was in the 2022 midterms. And so, I suspect that, there is some agita internally about that. Nikki Haley talked about this in her remarks after the election was called last night. But, I also think, though, that part of the reason why you're still seeing such strong support for Donald Trump is because leaders in the Republican Party have refused to take him on. This primary process was a joke.
Yeah.
Donald Trump didn't participate in basically a single primary debate. He's not answered the hard questions. He's not had to answer for his lawlessness, his corruption, what he would do for the country. And all the while, Republican leaders who were outraged at, his role in fomenting the attack on the U.S. Capitol on January 6th are turning a blind eye to, his potential return to power, are refusing to, call him out for the threat that he poses to the country. It's ridiculous. And, I think that's why he continues to, have such strong support in the party, is because, his fellow colleagues aren't willing to take him on.
Yeah, and look, you're watching the march to kisses behind, going on as we speak. I say all the time, Democrats fall in love, Republicans fall in line, and we're watching that. And for me, look, I get DeSantis, doing the Ted Cruz thing, going and kissing the ring. I get that. I get, most of the party. I'm waiting to see if Mike Pence, does the endorsement at some point. And I'm told from a lot of friends, it's going to happen, just a matter of when. And that will seal it for me, that they just completely fall into line, because there's nobody going to take him on.
I that would not surprise me. It would also not surprise me. I think all you have to do is look at, people like Congresswoman Elise Stefanik, people who worked in the Bush White House, right? We're all part of the Republican establishment, quote unquote, back in the day, who now are out there, defending Donald Trump for confusing Nikki Haley and Nancy Pelosi. She's now out there, talking about January 6th rioters being hostages. It's absolutely, buffoonish kind of behavior. And it's, I think, something that the American people could really see through.
I sure hope so. I got to tell you, because, this campaign, this election season, this is about the future of the country. And I look at what Biden's been doing, and I've been hammering on this a lot. What he has done in the last, 2.5 years is transformational. I mean, there's a major sea change in my view. where we have moved away from a lot of the neoliberal policies that got us into the mess that we're in, the bad free trade deals, the corporate begging. You're starting to break up some stuff, going after some of these big conglomerates, reshoring manufacturing, investing in infrastructure, supporting labor unions. All of what I call the secret sauce that built my grandparents' generation, that built the most prosperous working class in history, in the history of civilization. That to me is where we need to be looking. And I think Biden is moving us in that direction. I think he has to make that sale, though. He's got to explain to people where we're going, what the vision is as we're going down this road.
Yeah, I think that's right. But I think he has to paint a contrast for people, right? You mentioned having workers back, having their backs. It was Donald Trump as president who ignored the pleas of striking auto workers at General Motors in 2019 when they were demanding better wages and working conditions. They didn't have a partner in the Oval Office. In contrast, Joe Biden was the first president in American history to join workers on a picket line. He had their backs when they were standing up for, being treated with dignity. And in so doing, we actually saw the United Auto Workers this week endorsed President Biden, and they did so following, the historic wage increases that they have been able to earn. But I think you're right. I mean, this is part of a broader story. It's a question of, whose back do you have? Do you have the back of America's middle class, or again, do you have the back of the wealthy CEOs, people who only, politically agree with you? That is really just a completely different vision than the one that President Biden is really using to chart the path forward for the country.
No, I think he's got to get out there and make that sale that there's a vision, play on that hope and change. Say, look, we're coming together. We're going to reunite this country. And I say that the fastest way we can reunite this country is to reunionize the workforce so people can get better wages, hours, conditions, because people are a lot happier when they can pay their bills, they can put food on the table, they can get clothes on their kids' back, and they're not worried about, are they going to go broke and if they're going to lose their job tomorrow. So for me, a lot of it comes back to the economy. A lot of it comes back to the kitchen table. And look, reproductive rights are huge in this. But I think you brought up Shawn Fain. I think he laid out the contrast for working people in the most perfect way possible. You had Obama and Biden who helped save the auto industry, the auto workers, major sacrifices to save the industry, and
Sure.
Trump said it wasn't enough. Would have gotten more, wanted more pain and suffering. In fact, wanted to pit, the North against the South and rotate the jobs out so auto workers would be begging to get those jobs back at half the pay. I think that contrast right there, what more as a working person do you need to see?
I think you're totally right. You made a good point. When America's auto workers were staring into the abyss, around the Great Recession, it was Donald Trump who put the blame on unions. He put the blame on unions and tried to say that American workers, were too well taken care of, and they needed to take it on the chin in order to save the American auto industry. Of course, these auto workers did sacrifice, of course. We should be very clear about that.
Yeah.
But he did nothing to support them. Nothing. He kicked dirt in their face when they were down on their luck. And then when he got into the White House, like I mentioned, these auto workers at GM who went on strike trying to get a better wage after, watching their company come back from the Great Recession and earn these massive profits. What did he do? He didn't involve himself whatsoever. He didn't have their backs. He wasn't out there saying that GM should be doing right by their workers. They should be investing in them. He did nothing of the sort.
No, what he said is the union's leadership was selling the workers down the road, held a counter rally at a manufacturing place, a non-union place, where they had auto workers signs and all kinds of stuff. But
no auto workers.
And auto workers. And that's the weird part of this. It's all the dog and pony show, and I hope working people see their way through it. But last question I've got for you, in looking at this, are we concerned? I mean, I got to tell you, I'm concerned that Trump has a better than 50% chance of winning in November. I know he's not creating any new voters. In fact, he's losing people. If you look at some of the exit polling, some of the things people said in New Hampshire and in Iowa, I'm concerned that the energy is not on the Democratic side. Do you share that concern?
I think that we don't really need polls to tell us that this is going to be an exceptionally close election. We saw that play out in 2020, but I think ultimately at the end of the day, this is about the kind of country that the American people want to live in. Do they want to live in a country where their rights and freedoms are on the chopping block, or do they want to live in a country where they're protected? Do they want to live in a country where we invest in growing the middle class, or do we want to live in a country where the uber rich and political allies get all the benefits while everybody else takes it on the chin? Do we want to live in a country where crime is on the decline, or do we want to live in a country where guns flood our streets and crime skyrockets? And that really is the question before the American people. And I think that we're going to have, this is going to be the longest general election, basically, because both nominees have kind of crystallized so early in this process. This is going to be the longest general election, and people are going to have a very clear sense of what that choice is. And we should be clear, a lot of the electorate doesn't even actually really, it's not really set in with them yet that both Biden and Trump are going to be their party's nominees. So, there's a lot of time between now and November. But I think, I think that we've actually seen the president's numbers kind of strengthen over the course of the last month or two. I think also as these economic numbers kind of continue to improve, the consumer sentiment numbers, that is, I think that we, are well positioned to see, the president remain very competitive, going into November.
No, I got to tell you, I think he's moving us in the right direction. He's just got to get out there and sell what that vision is, I think. But Colin, I appreciate you taking some time, sharing your thoughts, your expertise. Good stuff.
Thanks, Rick.
Colin Seeburger, he's a senior advisor for communications there at the Center for American Progress Action Fund. He's also the host of The Tent. Wherever you get your podcasts, you can find The Tent Podcast. That's the CAP Action Funds podcast. Let's take a quick break. Right back. Stick around.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So on January 18th, Homeland Security officers searched a Chinese auto parts plant in Moraine, Ohio. Harco Manufacturing Group. Evidently, they've been accused of trade fraud by a congressional committee. And according to the Dayton Daily News, Harco is a subsidiary of Samsung, a Chinese parts manufacturer. But back in September, the House Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party wrote a letter to DHS Secretary Mayorkas accusing of Qingdao Samsung of moving some of its production to Thailand so that they could, evade the tariffs. And what the letter is calling for, it's called Samsung's actions a case of blatant trade fraud that is having catastrophic impact on American manufacturers, something that we talk about quite often here. And that's why I've asked my expert, my go-to guy, to come share some thoughts on this. And, maybe this is one of those things we should be highlighting that the Biden administration is doing to help protect jobs here at home. I've asked our good friend Scott Paul to come talk with us. Scott is the president of the Alliance for American Manufacturing, AmericanManufacturing.org, the website. Scott, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, Rick, it's great to be with you as always.
So what do you make of this? This company moved production to Thailand, evidently, so that they could bring stuff in here. Don't all American companies do this? Isn't this part of the whack-a-mole game that's been going on for years?
Took the words right out of my mouth, Rick. Yeah, this is the traditional trade whack-a-mole game. And it kind of started, let's rewind about a decade and a half ago. And China got into the auto parts making business in a big way in the 2000s, ramped up production. And then you saw a lot of that coming into the United States over the course of the 2010s. Okay. And so if you looked at a graph, exports from China to the U.S. shooting way up. This was displacing jobs here and causing disruption. The last administration put on a 25% tariff on a lot of different types of Chinese products, including some auto parts. And in some cases, that's what you call an exclusionary tariffs, like it was no longer cost effective for those goods to come from China to the United States with that 25% tariff. So what Samsung and other companies did was simply move the stuff they were making in China, temporarily basically putting it in another country like Thailand in this example, or Vietnam or Malaysia, or in some cases Mexico, and there's really a long list of countries. And these products, these parts are what I would call industrial tourists, okay? They're just there for a layover. Then they're moving on into the United States, and now the tariff doesn't have to be paid. So they can come into the market, they'll make their money, but they're essentially evading these tariffs that were put into place. And that is what the lawmakers were writing about and saying, hey, there is this whack-a-mole going on, which you mentioned, Rick, and we should do something about this because these really aren't products that are made in Thailand. They're really made in China, and they just have a made in Thailand stamp on them to avoid the tariffs. And of course, they're undercutting their competitors in the United States and everybody who's playing by the rules. So at the end of the day, you think about this one case, you multiply it by, hundreds of different times there's other companies doing this. And it has a real profound economic impact on communities like Moraine, Ohio, or anywhere else where they're manufacturing auto parts in this country.
And the thing is you talk to any of my mechanic friends, basically the Chinese auto parts that come into this country are garbage right out of the box. Half the time they're no good when you put them in, and you got to go do it, get another one to try again. And the sad reality is there doesn't seem to be, and you're the expert in this, there doesn't seem to be any U.S. auto parts really being made. It used to be when I was younger, they were everywhere, and then all of a sudden they just all went away. And it's this kind of mercantilist policy, it's this kind of attack on our industries that basically made all the U.S. auto part companies go away.
Yeah, I think in so many different ways, other than kind of garments and textiles, which are wearables, which you would call non-durable goods, the auto parts sector is probably hit harder by trade than any other, I think, personally. And it started with Mexico, and it crescendoed up to China, and now all this other circumvention that's taken place. And it has had a real disruptive effect on the industry and the types of auto parts products that we make in the United States. There's no question about it. And it's important as we're considering reviving a new auto industry in the United States, what that capability, what that capacity is. I think the other thing, Rick, that this raises is that our trade laws are completely inadequate to deal with the challenge. Like, you put this tariff on, You hope the problem goes away. These companies figure out a way around it, and then you're back to square one. And so there are some efforts. There's a bill called the Leveling the Playing Field Act 2.0, which would make it easier to block these imports that are being circumvented coming in instead of having to wait a couple years like you do now, right? You have to build a case, you have to raise the money for it, you have to show the economic evidence, and basically the damage has to be done before you can take any action. And it's too late then, right? It's too late. And so we need this kind of early warning system. And we need, and I like this, we need the feds to step up like Homeland Security did, raid this company and say, hey, you guys can't do this stuff. And so I think that will have some deterrent effect if they are, if there's more resources that are devoted to that, and it will help, make our auto parts companies and our workers in it way more competitive, because otherwise they're just, they're facing cheating every day.
Yeah. But here's my problem with a lot of this stuff. When you're talking about this level, it's usually some fine or some slap on the wrist or, oh, hey, we won't do it again. We'll post a notice. Now, personally, I'm against the death penalty when we're talking about people, but I am all in favor of the death penalty for corporations. If they want to be corporate people, I say we should be able to kill them off. And these kind of things should rise to that level of, sorry, you just can't be trusted. You got to go away.
Yeah, and there's mechanisms to do that under the law, either if they represent a security risk or if they violated sanctions or done other things like that, where basically they can be blacklisted or placed on entities of concern. But you can also hike the tariffs up so high on all of these countries, whether it's 200, 300%, that they can't economically send these things in the United States. So there are a couple of tools available to try to do this, but navigating this, and here's the thing, right? It's like your average auto parts shop owner who's making these products, somewhere in the industrial heartland, is running a small shop, probably somewhere between 50 and 200 folks, and it's not like they have a trade law department. I mean, they're trying to get their product out the door. And so it is so difficult for these firms to try to combat this on their own, which is basically combating the government of China and all these large global companies. So they do need some help in cases like this from Homeland Security or from the Department of Commerce when it comes to filing trade cases. There's a lot more that could and should be done to act on behalf of American workers and businesses. And as I mentioned, there are ways in which we can strengthen this law. So instead of passing more free trade agreements, let's focus on the laws that we have. Let's make them stronger. Let's make them more, fast acting. And that way they'll be far more effective instead of like stopping the bleeding after, the patient has been chronically ill, so to speak, for a couple of years, that you're getting it right away. Yeah. And there's a better chance for that industry not only to survive, but to grow in the future as well.
How about we pass the I'm tired of being the global dumping ground act, and we go back to the idea of domestic production for domestic consumption, and we build things here. Because look, I'm old enough to remember, where I grew up in Cleveland, there was Brook Park Avenue was like a manufacturing hub. You had the Ford plant, you had the Chevy plant, and you had, hundreds of little feeder plants that made the parts that went into those cars. Everything was domestically, locally sourced and built, and the jobs that were created were good, solid, middle-income jobs that supported families. We can recreate that. And look, I think Biden is moving us in a direction to do some of that. I wish they would do a lot more touting that message of saying, look, things are tough. And we're changing course, we're moving in this direction, and sell that direction, sell that hope, that future, that vision, because I think people will really get around that idea that, hey, we are going to take all those things that Trump talked about and actually do them. And I know Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen's traveling throughout the Midwest, promoting the economic record and all of this. But I think you got to lean fully into this with the whole administration going, this is a sea change. This is real hope and real change for American working people.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. And look, let's give Secretary Janet Yellen, the Treasury Secretary, and also someone like Lael Brainerd, who's the head of the National Economic Council, props for agreeing to industrial policy, for pivoting on trade, and for overseeing programs that have lifted a bunch of people out of poverty, that have stabilized the middle class, that are growing wages, that are doing all of that stuff. They're doing a great job. In addition to that, I think we also need authentic working class folks to be out there in the communities saying,
yep,
this is what these policies have done. Trump gave us one leg of what we needed. He gave us the tariffs, and even then it was really shaky and kind of not very strategic. But with Biden, we have the tariffs, we have the investment, we have the Buy America, and we have the support for unions and the working class that is helping to lift those wages up. And to be out there articulating this, I think is going to be very important, because, you know, people, and you know, look, I'm preaching to the choir here because I know you understand this too. It's like the news they're getting is doom and gloom about the economy. Although whether you look at the stock market or you look at your paycheck or everything, or you look at prices, you know, gas prices are coming down, paychecks are going up, stock market is up. All the indicators are pretty good, but there's not that reinforcement in the community to get across how policy has driven some of that. And then there are also short memories of how bad things were just a few years ago. And to ask that fundamental question, are you better off now or were you better off 4 years ago? And it's going to be a pretty universal answer to that if you phrase it like that. But you need, in addition to the Secretary Yellens or the Lael Brainards, you need some folks who can connect authentically with working class people who have kind of walked the walk before,
yeah.
and are able to be in those communities and doing this every day until people finally say, you know what, I finally got the message. I understand, because not enough Americans are aware of this type of transformation that's underway.
And that's a problem with our corporate controlled mainstream media. And look, they're easy to beat up on, but the reality is they want a horse race. The doom and gloom sells, you know, the old, if it bleeds, it leads mentality. And this is where, if I'm Biden, every time someone sticks a microphone in my face and asks a dumb question, I'm asking, like Trump would do, why aren't you reporting on all of the great things that our administration is doing, on the jobs that are being created here, here, and here? Why aren't you talking about that? Why is it the doom and gloom? Why is it stuff that feeds into this narrative that things are bad when really the numbers are pointing us in the right direction?
Yeah, I think that's right. And there's so many examples. It's like that bridge that collapsed outside of Pittsburgh, and then with infrastructure and the local and the feds and the state working together, got it rebuilt in record time, you know, as one example. Or the fact that just a couple of years ago, we had semiconductor chip shortages, and you couldn't get an Xbox or an automobile or an appliance or anything like that because virtually all those semiconductors were manufacturing overseas. Now we have like 7 or 8 semiconductor factories being built in the United States. And that goes on and on and on. And so I do think that there is a really important story to tell. And ultimately, and I know I'm preaching to the choir here, because there's always going to be the flash in the pan issues that come up, right? And you got to address those in some way. But at the end of the day, and tell me if I'm wrong here, you know, most, if not all, elections really turn on economic issues, right? And how you're feeling about your own personal economic situation, and how you're feeling about the direction of the country. And there, again, I think there's a really good story for this president and the administration to tell if they choose to do so.
I'm right there with you. But for me, it's also that positive, that hope and change narrative that Obama used so masterfully in 2008. I think we're at one of those moments. I think what he is doing, what we've been talking about for almost 2 decades now, this idea that we're changing from what we've done in the past. We're changing from what got us into the mess, especially for working people. I know our billionaires are fat and happy. They're doing really well. Laid out the numbers yesterday of just how well they're doing. When you got 5 people on the planet who've seen their wealth go up by almost $1 trillion over the last year, there's a problem with distribution. So for me, this idea that we're changing course and returning to the ideals of a prosperous time, that's exciting to me, and I think we need to sell that in a much better way. Just my view. And I know they're going to try, but I think we need to do a better job.
Yeah, and just how important that is overall, and you can translate this into values, I think, is like, America is built on a solid foundation of having a stable, engaged middle class. That means strong communities, in so many different states.
Yep.
It means strong civic institutions. And the foundation of that are good jobs with good wages, right? It's the underpinning of all of that.
Yep.
And so there is a way, I think, to bring that back around. But every day, Rick, it's got to be every day.
Every day, every word. Message discipline. Democrats have always needed to learn that. But Scott, as always, I appreciate the time. Great stuff. Look forward to talking to you next time.
Thanks so much for having me on, Rick. Appreciate it.
Our good friend Scott Paul. I want to hear your thoughts. You agree with me? We should be building more stuff here at home. Where's my key phrase? Domestic production for domestic consumption. I want to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Right back after this. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1787. That was the day known as Shays' Rebellion. The United States was a new nation, and the Constitution had not yet been written. The Revolutionary Army had won the war with Britain, but the young nation was mired in debt. During the aftermath of the war, more farmers moved into western Massachusetts. Many of them incurred high levels of debt in setting up their farms. Due to economic hard times, the farmers found it difficult to repay their debts. Local sheriffs began to seize farms and even jailed some farmers. Anger amongst the farmers began to rise. They held meetings to discuss how to respond. Many saw the government's actions as an echo of the very type of tyranny they had stood up against during the Revolutionary War. They petitioned Boston for economic relief, but their requests fell on deaf ears. The farmers began to protest the courts, disrupting the proceedings. For 6 months, the farmers waged organized resistance. One of the men whose farm was threatened for repossession was Daniel Shays. Shays was a former captain in the Continental Army who had fought against the British. He organized a force of 1,000 men. The men marched on the debtors' court in Springfield and the arsenal located there. The governor of Massachusetts called out armed troops in response. These troops were funded by wealthy merchants from the eastern part of the state. And so, on this day, 4 of Shays' men were killed as the troops attempted to forcibly remove the rebels. By February, the rebellion had been crushed. The rebellion influenced the writing of the U.S. Constitution, as some drafters were convinced that a strong central government was needed to quell further uprisings by the working class. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com. Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out our website, thericksmithshow.com. Questions, comments, something on your mind. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. So, talking with Scott Paul, my mind started going to auto parts. And like I said to Scott, the reality is I've got a lot of friends who are mechanics and work on cars. And, one of the things that they always tell me is, the parts aren't the same. They'll swap out parts, and you get this cheap crap from China that out of the box is garbage. And it's cheaper. We got it cheaper, and cheaper is pretty much garbage. And I remember having conversations with, a number of these people who were like, when you had parts made in the U.S., these were, you could stand by them. They cost a little bit more, but, they lasted. And that's the thing that as a society we've lost. My wife and I talk about this all the time. I'm willing to pay more for something that's going to last. For instance, at our house, our heat pump took a turn for the worse. And we had someone come out and take a look at it and replace a couple of parts and do some stuff. But, I said, we might think about replacing it. And he's like, don't, because the stuff that we're replacing it with has a life expectancy of 8 to 10 years. Yours is, 20 years old, probably got another 10 years in it because it was made differently. You've got this planned obsolescence of just about everything. It's about churning out products. It's about people buying and consuming and more and more and more and more, instead of, my grandparents. My grandmother had 3 washing machines her entire life. And the last one, I think is still running. And she's passed, 7 years ago? We used to build stuff to last. We used to build stuff out of real material. Not cheap plastic garbage that is, by the time you get it out of the box, it's broken. And, the auto parts thing is kind of a big deal, in that I remember as a kid, you had, the Ford and the Chevy plant there on Brook Park Avenue, and then all of the parts and all of the feeder plants that went into that. You made the parts locally. They shipped them across the street, not across the globe. And you go back to, when Delphi went under. Delphi was a major auto parts supplier, a former subsidiary of GM, and they filed bankruptcy in 2005. And why? Well, because they were getting crushed from China. We just 5 years of giving them PNT, permanent normal trade relations, created this situation where, mergers and, debt and all kinds of stuff went and just crushed them. And there were thousands of jobs lost, good union jobs, family sustaining jobs. Visteon Corporation, a former subsidiary of the Ford Motor Company, they filed bankruptcy in 2009 again. Why? China, cheap junk being dumped in here. And we as consumers, we've got choice. And I remember being told this a lot. You've got choice. You can pay a little bit more for the American-made product, but wouldn't you? The cheaper product it's the same. And you go, no, the cheaper one is cheaper for a reason, because it's garbage. And go down the list of products that we used to make here, that now we make in places like China, with the cheapest, most exploitable labor, with the most lax environmental regulations, with, because, hey, we got to kill those regulations off. And massive profits for our shareholders and our corporations. But for the workers, major screw job. For consumers, even bigger of a screw job, because what you're getting is garbage. And basically the entire auto parts industry. You can't find many parts made in the U.S. And the thing that I like about Biden is he's saying, look, okay, we're going to be moving to these EVs, electric vehicles. They're going to be the future. We need to source them here. We need to build them here. We need to manufacture. We need to do all that stuff here. We need to create that infrastructure from the ground up so that the future of these vehicles is here in the U.S. And we're going to protect those industries that we did not do because of the horrible neoliberal trade policies, because of the free traders, and we need to open up the world, because countries that trade, they don't fight each other. Well, we're finding out that's not necessarily true. And basically everything we were sold, all of it, was garbage. It was to make the rich richer and the working class poorer. And congratulations, it succeeded. Congratulations, they did it. They made working people poorer. Now you're looking at at this administration saying, look, we need to shore up our supply lines. We need to have a supply chain that's much more resilient, that's domestic, which is why, I've been saying for years, this is not new. People who have been listening to the show for a while know I have always been a proponent of domestic production for domestic consumption. Build it here with American workers, with American products, and build good stuff. I'm willing to pay more for stuff that's going to last, and I think every American is. This idea that, I can get $50 worth of cheap garbage at the Wally World, and somehow I'm going to feel better about myself is ludicrous. Because day after tomorrow, most of that junk is broken. You want to be a good environmentalist? Stop producing so much. Use the stuff we have and make it last. That's old school thinking, I know. But I'll tell you, it's gonna help us reshore the manufacturing that we so desperately need. So good talking with Scott. I got to tell you, we sorely need to reshore manufacturing. But I want to hear your thoughts. You got any stories like my example of growing up in my hometown of Cleveland? All those factories, all those feeder plants, they're all gone, all empty. It's a shame. Rick at thericksmithshow.com. Miss any portion of the program, grab the podcast. Wherever you get your favorite podcast, you'll find ours. Thanks for being here. See you back here next time.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Email Rick at rick@thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.